My guest today is Andy Boreham. Andy is a New Zealander. I won't hold that against him, who has been a long-term resident in Shanghai. Andy works for the Shanghai United Media Group as part of his day job, but most of you will probably know Andy as the face, the voice, and the energy behind Waimei Kan Zhongguo, reports on China. And Andy is now a successful author who has recently published the book, The Wu Mao Handbook. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Warwick, good to see you. It's going to be awesome taking questions from you instead of the other way around for once.
Right, it's a great relief for me because I don't think I'll need to be on my toes as much as I normally have to be when I'm on the other end of the experience. Now, one of the things that so let's just dive in. One of the things that often comes up in the banter, if you will, and I use that term advisedly because sometimes I think it's a little bit sharper and pointier than banter, but it's the idea of somebody like you as being a sort of a paid hack, which seeks to diminish your professional qualifications and your experiences that you bring to the table. And what I'd like people to sort of get a sense of is the fact that you're actually a trained pro in this space, and I'd just like you to tell us how you ended up working for Shanghai United Media Group. But what is it about your training and your educational background and professional background that has led you to this moment today?
Wow, actually, it's a huge question because I think my whole life has kind of led to this. It's been a continuation. I've been into media my whole life. When I was about 10 or 11 years old, I bought my first video camera. I was making movies all the time. When I was about 13 or 14, I launched a TV channel using those old video senders you could get that like broadcast your video maybe 200 or 300 meters. So I made a TV channel. At intermediate school, I was the publisher of our school newspaper during the elections. So I had to go and interview candidates and stuff for the class presidency, which was awesome. Basically, I've just been doing media my whole life. I made a newspaper in my street as well when I was younger called Ko-Fi Kids News. Got in a bit of trouble with the police for that after some scandals involving neighbors, violent neighbors, and things like that. So I learned early on the power of the media, I guess. As a kid, I've been just obsessed with media the whole time. So first I went to film school when I was 18, straight after high school. I was at that stage interested in making films and stuff. That kind of subsided after I learned about the politics involved. You have to do a lot of networking and sucking up to people. I'm not into that. So I kind of moved on. I launched a national newspaper. It was printed on newsprint, but it was more like a magazine, we ran for about 4 years, which was pretty awesome. Done radio shows, written for various media. And then I worked in politics for a short time while I was still studying at Victoria doing my undergraduate, helping a small party leader with some media stuff. So I think the whole journey has kind of led to, it's just kind of an evolution. So how did I end up at Shanghai United Media Group? Well, I was studying my master's at Fudan University here in Shanghai, and obviously really interested in how Chinese media works. It's completely different. Well, for a novice, it's completely different than Western media, which is kind of viewed, as you know, as very open, very free. Oftentimes, I think there's a media transparency or media freedom list. New Zealand was always right at the top, either number one, number two, or number three. In China, under the Western standards, was always right at the bottom. So I was really interested in how does it work? Is it censored? Is it run by the party? I was very, very fascinated. So I did an internship actually at Shanghai Daily. Well, first I did an internship at Sixth Tone for a summer, then ended up at Shanghai Daily. Was there for the last year of my master's, and then when I was about to graduate and wanting to go do maybe a doctorate or something else, they sprung it on me. They were like, you should stay here. So I stayed, and it's pretty much led to today. Now I do a show, like you said, Reports on China, which I started about 3 years ago. That's also under Shanghai Daily. 工作室, we have a media, what's it called in English? A studio. And so, yeah, that's basically how I ended up here. And I've been learning about Chinese media ever since, I guess.
So that curiosity that brought you down this little rabbit hole, what have you discovered? How have you answered the original questions that you had when you first moved from Fudan University into this internship and ultimately to being in this position now for about a decade or so, I guess.
Yeah, about 8 years, I think, in Shanghai Daily now. What I found was actually Chinese media is very free. There are a few red lines you can't cross, obviously. And then it's important to realize that in China, media is kind of an extension or underneath the government. It's part of the government. Whereas in the West, there's this really clear distinction. Obviously, media and government need to be and have to be legally completely separate. I mean, if you found some instances where maybe the government had been colluding with the media in New Zealand, for example, heads would roll. That would be a big scandal. But in China, media is actually part of the government. It's not directly a part of the government, but it's under the government. So, um, yeah, there's a few red lines you can't cross. For example, you can't push for separatism of the country, which seems pretty obvious. You can't promote Taiwan independence or mention maybe that Hong Kong should be separate or whatever. You can't incite ethnic hatred or instability in the country, things like that you can't do, which seems pretty obvious. But other than that, I think it's really quite free. So that's probably one of my biggest takeaways. Actually, it's not as exciting as it seems to outsiders. Like a lot of people say to me, "Oh, you work for the CPP, blah blah blah," and they make my life sound so exciting. It's actually not, and that's probably the biggest thing I found out.
One of the interesting things that I've personally found about Chinese media is that it actually has a very old world feel, meaning that it feels like reading newspapers from 30 or 40 years ago, a little bit bland, a little bit
Mm.
too newsy, very little
Yes.
opinion, actually, sort of a little bit facts and figures oriented. Is that part of its sort of systemic role, that it's really there as a transmitter of information as opposed to the kind of roles that media in Western countries have kind of evolved into, which is an opinion-setting role, an editorializing role, and of course, at times, a prosecutorial role, vis-a-vis whether it's government or something else within the society. Is that how you're sort of still sensing it, living and working in that environment?
Yeah, I think so. I think a lot of people don't realize, like they call it this big propaganda machine. I think Chinese media, one of its big roles is getting, like you said, getting information across, important information to the public, keeping the public informed. Stability is a huge thing with Chinese media. Like in China, you're not going to see stories about, even though it's hideous. Like for example, one old lady had a break-in. She was mugged in her home while she slept. In New Zealand and Australia and the US, that would become a huge story, and people would be freaking out. And I don't actually think that's necessary. You know the saying of Western media: if it bleeds, it leads, and that's really what it is. It's dramatic. They want to find conflict. That's part of the modus operandi of Western media. I think people want scandal and drama. And they're not used to this. Like when it comes to China, they're not used to media that is just putting across factual information people need to know. You mentioned editorializing. I think there is a lot of editorialization here in China when it comes to content that doesn't relate to those red lines or topics that are of national interest. For example, I think you know the saying "吃喝玩乐." Like people love to do content on like fun things to eat and drink, things to do, the latest movies, games. That is probably the area where you see the most. I guess it's most free because it's of no consequence. But of topics that are of consequence, that are important to stability, the government leads that. And I think it's actually really good. I think the Western and the Chinese models are they're at loggerheads with each other. They're completely different. But I think both have pluses and both have minuses. So that's what's been interesting to learn.
Yeah, it seems that the ways in which public authorities are, in a sense, held to account in the Chinese environment relies a lot more on very specific organs of state to do the investigative work and to address issues of corruption and malpractice and malfeasance. Whereas it seems that in the Western environment, a lot of that public responsibility has, in a sense, either fallen onto the shoulders of the media or the media has
Mm.
decided that it has a role in doing that. And that division of labor still remains quite firmly in place in China. Would that be, roughly in line with your experiences as well?
Yeah, I think when it comes to that, you mentioned corruption. We see a lot of stories in Chinese media of officials that have been removed from the party or sentenced for corruption. That is definitely left up to the media. You won't see, especially media like Shanghai Daily, going out on its own, 主动的, going to find those kind of stories or investigating or things like that, because that is really left up to those organs that have a lot more experience and professionalism in that area. There's whole bodies in China that are set up just for discipline, which a lot of people find interesting, especially in the party. So I think people are held to account at a lot of more of a higher standard. I think if you're going to relegate that kind of thing, I mean, it does have its use in the Western system. It's like in China, the governance system here really suits China. So I wouldn't even say maybe other countries should emulate China or anything like that. You need to do what's good for you, good for your history, good for your people, matches your culture. But in China, I think you're right. It definitely, that sort of stuff is relegated away from the media, and the media just reports on it, which I think lends to stability, professionalism, and I think it gives people a lot more confidence in the government. Now, people overseas might turn around and say, well, we need someone outside of the government to be doing that kind of job, digging around and things like that. And there might be some basis to that, but I think it really works for China.
One of the interesting things that I've found in terms of your journey is that uh, about 3 years ago you kicked off this program. Waimei Kanzhongguo. What is it in English again?
Reports on China.
Reports on China, and it was really
Mm,
a way of responding to the ways in which the Western media had increasingly began to frame China. What was
mm.
your sort of inspiration for that, and ultimately what compelled you to bother, if you will?
Well, actually, my inspiration for doing my own program happened a bit before that. Actually, probably back to the Hong Kong riots, the whole mess there.
Mhm.
um, in Shanghai Daily at that stage, because as I mentioned before, the media in China has to relegate certain important issues to Beijing media. It's very hierarchical. So when it came to the Hong Kong riots and all of that, we weren't allowed to go out and create our own stories. We needed to post what was given to us from above. And I thought their job was absolutely ludicrous, absolutely terrible. They did a terrible job. And I said to my boss, this stuff that we're posting from Beijing is it's not going to work with a Western audience. Like, what it felt like was Chinese content just translated into English. It was like the way they were speaking was aimed at people who already understood a lot more of the Chinese culture. And I don't think it would go down well in the West. And it didn't. So I said to my boss, I want to do something myself. I want to, I think I can target foreign readers, foreign viewers better with more understanding. And they were like, we can't, this is how Chinese media works. We just need to leave it to Beijing. So I was like, so I was thinking, what could we do better? And a few years after that, I think 2 years after that, I had the opportunity to make my own content. And of course, my undergraduate degree was three majors: media, political science, and Chinese. And I think those three really go well into reports on China. So I said to my boss, I want to do a show in my own style, kind of hitting back at these Western media narratives about issues in China that they're painting in such a biased and untrue way. And my boss initially was like, would anyone watch that? And I was like, let me do one. And it went really well, and the rest is history. So I think what I try to do is, I mentioned before that in the West, the media really works on a if it bleeds, it leads kind of modus operandi. They want drama and scandal. So in a way, for me, when I'm telling stories from China to a Western audience, I try to put a bit of that in there, even though I don't agree with it that much. So you need a bit of scandal, you need a bit of I don't know, you need to kind of up it a bit and not be so nice, because Chinese media is very nice. So I kind of
Spice it
attack
up.
Western media.
Spice it
Yeah,
up.
I can attack Western reporters, exactly, and it worked. People want to see that. So it's completely different what I do, even though I work for Chinese media, because my audience is overseas. So I can kind of put in a bit of the spicy aspects that make foreign viewers believe it more. If you tell Chinese stories and you're only telling, the positive sides, and this goes for negative stories about other countries as well. China doesn't like to even bring up negative stories about other countries, which I find, honorable, but it just doesn't work for a Western audience. You need to have a bit of scandal, have a bit of spice. So that's what I do with reports on China. I think it's working with Western viewers, I hope.
You actually also have a fairly substantial social media footprint in China as well for reports on China.
Mm,
There are, of course, a lot of English
yeah.
speakers living in China. How do you navigate these two audience ecosystems, so to speak?
Well, I don't consider, even though my Chinese, they say fan base in China, but it sounds a bit cocky. My Chinese follow number is much higher than in the West. I think I have about 3 million followers here in China. I don't target my content to them at all. So when I'm making content, it's not even in my mind. I'm just thinking, for my Western audience, that's the main goal. And then any views we get in China is just a bonus. So all we do is take the exact same content and add Chinese subtitles. Well, actually, we have English and Chinese because a lot of people want to learn English through my content, and we make some more Chinese style thumbnails and add text and everything in a catchy way for Chinese audiences, but the content remains the same. So, in terms of navigating both audiences, I don't. I just aim for my Western audience, to be honest.
How have you found the experience over the last 3 years in terms of the effectiveness of the program, how you've adapted and modified it as you've gone? What kind of feedback have you gotten, both from a good point of view, but also, as you'd expect, from the, let's call it the trolling perspective? How have you sort of coped with all of that?
Well, there is a lot of trolling, as you know, especially on Twitter, or X as they call it now. It doesn't really get to me. In terms of feedback, I get a lot of positive feedback on YouTube. I think 99% of the feedback is positive. So actually, a lot of the time, I kind of just glaze past it and look for the negative feedback because I want to know um, when I've got outside of the bubble, so to speak. But in terms of changes, I've figured out people have a short attention span is one of them. So I used to, in the beginning, I would have maybe 3 stories in one video, like 3 different news stories that I'm breaking apart. People don't tend to watch it. They want to have like a very focused, very driven 7 or 8 minute video. I found my viewers like that the most. So I've kind of tailored it more towards that and try to keep it short and snappy. What else? People love to make fun of my hair. I don't really get it, but that's what the trolls often say. That they just say, "Oh, you've got a communist haircut" or something. So I'll joke back and say, "Yeah, I have only like 7 styles I'm allowed to choose from, so this is the one I chose. Get over it." But a lot of the time, the trolling feedback is not useful at all. I wish it was. Like, I really want people to say to me, "I don't agree with you. This is why," and lay down the arguments. For example, under a certain video, they could say, "You said this, but I think blah 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 blah." They never do that. They just do ad hominem attacks, so it's actually not much use. But yeah, I wish there was more negative, what do we call it? Constructive feedback. But I think it's too much to hope for.
The, the other thing that you did do too, of course, you were brandished quite early on in this process as the as part of the Wu Mao, which is
Mm.
uh, a bit of tar that is thrown at particularly Westerners who are talking about China uh, in more constructive or positive terms. Now, for many people, that tarring with the Wu Mao brush would have uh, really knocked them about a little bit. But it seems that you've absorbed that and flipped it on its head as and brought a sense of irreverence to the way that you go about what you do and how you tell the stories. And could you just tell us a little bit about how you thought about that process and ultimately what you did do to turn what were negative energies into, in a sense, a launching pad for something new?
Well, actually, to be honest, I don't think I was the one that first started it, but I came up with it independently. You know how some people come up with the same thing at different times. I think after I started promoting it and my Twitter really kicked off and I got more followers, I think I promoted the Wumao tag right from the beginning. Like, you should be proud. Like, you want to call me Wumao? You think that hurts me? Like, I'm happy to be saying, telling you the truth about China. So I made badges and merchandise and cups and things like that to try to turn it around. And then I found out slowly, once I got more familiar with a lot of the other people that had been on Twitter longer in the China space, particularly foreigners, they'd been doing it for a few years already. People like Daniel Dumbrill, he already made Wu Mao t-shirts and stuff. So people have been doing it for a little while. So I'm just part of the movement. But I think, it takes the wind out of their stupid accusations. And it's funny that you mentioned that it's popular in the West, because you say Wu Mao, it's obviously a term from China. It means 50 cents. The accusation is that we're paid 50 cents per post to say something good about China. But actually in China, a lot of people don't know what Wu Mao means. So I called the book the Wu Mao Handbook. But when we release it in China, there's a very big chance it won't actually have this name, because people don't know really what it means, which is interesting.
It often happens a lot, doesn't it, where terms that are used in the Western context to talk about China or to talk about how people talk about China has absolutely zero resonance at all in China itself, and it's a very very Western cliched approach to actually thinking and talking about these things, which creates this gloss of insider sense, that Wu Mao, that's Chinese, therefore it's got some relevance, but actually, in fact, it has no resonance at all. Now,
Exactly.
this book, right? I was in Shanghai a little while ago and saw the work in progress, and so congratulations, firstly, on bringing all of that work to fruition. Could you just talk us a little bit through, again, your inspirations for it, why you did it, how you thought through the design, the feel, I guess, because you can tackle these issues in many different ways, and you've tackled it in a very particular way that introduces some artwork as a way of illustrating core messages and themes. And I'd just like you to firstly just again give us a little bit of behind the scenes of how this Wu Mao handbook came to be, firstly, and eventually I'm going to hit you up for a few of your favorite sections in it as well.
Okay, well, actually, because of that whole Wu Mao branding and people calling us Communist Party propagandists and things like that, I wanted to do the design as if that were really the truth. So I did with the artwork and everything, a very kind of propagandic feel. It looks like old propaganda from the Cultural Revolution, and that's kind of the look I was going for, and the feeling as well. Like, it's very simple, and it looks kind of, from a Western aesthetic, I feel like it looks kind of communist, and that's exactly what I was going for. And actually, I've done that for a little while with my merchandise. I'll just show you this enamel mug I made. The old enamel. It's like in the West we take it camping, but this is like one of my mugs I made that looks like. Try and focus it there. It looks like those old kind of. It just has a communist feel. I know that sounds stupid, but I think that's how the Westerner would look at it. And that's kind of the way I've gone all along, because I think it's a really cool aesthetic. And I think people who appreciate my program would appreciate this look. So that's what I've kind of tried to tie it together with everything I do. So I guess I wanted to have a concise, like, kind of 70s or 60s style handbook that, how they used to have like those Boy Scout handbooks, they'll teach you how to tie a rope and how to survive a flooded car and things like that. It's kind of what I was going for. So this actually has an alternative title, which I didn't put on the cover, but it's called the Wu Mao Handbook, or How to Defeat an Anti-China Troll. So what I imagined was people, they're online, they see an anti-China troll, and they'll grab the book and be like, oh, what's he talking about? Oh, he said slave labor. Flick to the slave labor page, find all the information. It's kind of like a Boy Scout or Girl Guide handbook. That's what I was going for. So yeah, that's kind of what I worked for, and I thought it would be good to have. I was going to go for more, but it takes quite a lot of research to get all the facts, because you want to back it up with the facts. Obviously, you don't just want to spout on. So there's some big issues in here. There's 2 chapters on Taiwan. One of them is the lie that Taiwan is a country. One is about the Taiwan invasion. So clearly there's a lot of material you need to go through to find out, the actual reality, what the real situation is, and how to fight back against those trolls. So yeah, that's what I was going for. I think I answered your question.
And what did you learn in the process of putting it together? What were the things that you discovered about China that you didn't know?
Wow. Speaking of the Taiwan issue, probably that was one of the big ones because it's really quite a complicated situation, the whole Taiwan question. So I had help from a friend in Taiwan, you may know from online, Xiang Yu, and I sent him the chapter first, and I was, kind of thinking he's going to give me all these huge changes to make or whatever. He understands the situation much deeper than I do, so he came back and gave me a lot of suggestions, pointed me to some research and some historical facts, and even some recent facts. So I learned a lot about Taiwan and the Taiwan question actually in writing this book. So I really hope in the next, because this is volume one, I hope in volume two I'll learn even more about that. So it was a journey for me as well. Like people will say to me, "Oh wow, you've done a Wu handbook debunking 20 anti-China lies. You know so much about China," but it's not the case. Like doing this book was actually a learning experience for me as well, doing all the research. So probably I learned a lot about every single topic in here. I would say.
You've mentioned that there's 20 lies. Obviously, there were more, but you had to trim it down. You've talked about the
Yeah,
possibilities, or in fact, the inevitability of volume two. How did you select
yeah.
the 20? What shortlist methodology did you use to say, look, I think these are going to be the main topics for volume one?
Well, I came up with a list of about 50 anti-China lies, and then I thought I need to add. I wanted to have a balance in there because when I mentioned the Taiwan chapter, that's the first chapter, and it's actually the longest chapter in the whole book. But I want it to be really concise and not too daunting for the viewer. So, while I would love to have included every single lie and done a book of 50, I figured I need to kind of intersperse the larger and more in-depth chapters with much shorter ones. For example, in here, the chapter on the China, what is it called? Uh, social credit score, the
Yeah.
social credit score, which is one of the huge lies. Basically, that's one page long. So basically, in here, I just say there's no social credit score, and then I have a few more other facts, and it's a very quick chapter. So I wanted to kind of, and there's games and stuff in here as well. So I wanted to kind of, when I chose them, I needed to have a bunch that were very core China lies that maybe were a bit deeper and a bit longer and maybe a bit more difficult to comprehend, and then some that were much simpler and quicker and more fun. So that's kind of how I mixed and chose the
Well,
topics.
one of the things that I really found very fascinating about the design of this as a communications device or a communications medium is that you
Mm.
have you always seem to insist on bringing a sense of irreverence and fun to what it is that you do and how it is that you seek to tell China's story well, so to speak. Now, this book has, as you mentioned, some games, but the other thing that I particularly like about it, and maybe it's a personal thing, is that you commissioned a illustrations to go with each of the chapters and had a very particular aesthetic sense that you wanted to achieve with that. Tell us a little bit about that,
Mm.
the way that you thought about how you should illustrate the book, because it could have been just a boring encyclopedia, right?
Yeah, I like I said before, I really wanted to go with that kind of propaganda theme. I think it also adds fire to the anti-China trolls. Like I kind of want to pee them off as well. So I'm just riding into the whole thing of them calling us propagandists and Wuma, I guess, by just making it very propagandic looking. So I went with this style, which was very popular during a lot of periods in Chinese history when this kind of, those big street posters were
Yeah.
popular. And of course, it's the same as on this mug as well. I'll try and focus it. It's the
Socialist
same
realism.
style.
Socialist realism.
That's a cool term. So yeah, I wanted to use that, and I added some. I wanted to add some humor into some of the illustrations as well. Some of them aren't that. Some of them are kind of more just illustrative, and some of them are more humorous. Like one of my favorite ones is this chapter, line number 15. There are no birds in China, and this illustration, it's kind of that feeling, but it's just kind of silly. Like the illustration showing that there are birds in China has an actual human bird sitting there eating at a night market stall, which I just think I really love this illustration. It's one of my favorites. So there's a lot more treasures in there with the illustrations if you want to grab the book. We were initially going to do illustrations for every chapter, 20 chapters, but in the end we only ended up doing 8 because it was just taking too long. So hopefully in the future we can have more and extend on that, because I really do enjoy this style. And also, if you grab the book, there's a funny note that I put in the acknowledgements page. Anyway, if you grab the book, read that, because it's more fodder for the haters.
You're really going out of your way to have a bit of fun with all of this, but quite obviously.
You have to.
Now,
Honestly, you have to. Like, there's no way around it.
today is, I think, the 22nd or the 23rd of May. So the book hasn't been out very long, but it's already hitting some fairly substantial numbers. I think it's hit the number 1 bestseller on Amazon in its category.
It's like
Certainly a few.
number one new release in Asian politics, which is pretty cool.
It's obviously a pleasant surprise, but is it a surprise, or how has been the feedback so far? Clearly, it's struck a chord. It's hit a bit of a note out there in the world, really.
I hope so. We've had a lot of customers, I guess you'll call them, from the US is number 1, and the UK, Canada, and Australia. And Australia has to include New Zealand, I think, because the New Zealanders buy it from the Australian market. So I think a lot of people are now just more open to finding out the truth about China, especially this year. China's had so many wins, including when Xiaohongshu Red Note became popular. Like, China is just becoming cool this year. So I think it's the perfect time to release such a book. And I think people are more open this year alone to reading something like this that may not have been last year. And especially with the Trump tariff situation, like how China has stood up and kind of pushed back has given people a lot of, people are taking a second glance at China and saying, maybe I've thought wrong about this huge country, which is awesome. So yeah, the book, it's always a surprise for me when something works out. People say to me, you've got 100,000 followers on YouTube now. Like, of course people bought the book. It's like, no, not necessarily. Nothing's ever a given. That's how I like to look at it. So any success, I'm really, really excited and honored about. So thanks to everyone that's bought it. But in terms of the numbers, it reached number 1 in the US market for new releases under Asian politics. Then it reached number 4 overall in the Asian politics section in the US, number 4 in the Asian politics section in Australia, and in Canada it reached number 16, top 20 for international politics. So it's really awesome. I do think, though, that because I just released a Kindle version yesterday, people were saying from the beginning they wanted a Kindle version. And I was like, oh, that's so boring, because I really feel like if you can hold a book, like, this is how I intended it. It's like a handbook. I kind of wanted to force people to get the book. But a lot of people wanted a Kindle version, and I didn't kind of buy it. And then when the book went on sale, a lot of people were saying, oh, I can't buy it because I only read Kindle. So I released a Kindle version yesterday, about a week after the launch. So I think maybe if I released all of those, the Kindle version from day one, it might have even reached number 1 overall in those sectors. Who knows? We'll see next time.
So apart from volume 2, what are the big projects coming up for Andy Boreham? Put aside the day job. You obviously have got a fertile mind where you're constantly thinking of interesting, let's call them side projects, though I'm not really quite sure whether they're side projects or not. So what can we look forward to over, say, the next 3 months, 6 months to 12 months from the fertile mind of Andy Boreham?
Well, at the moment, I'm still working on the Chinese version of the Wu Mao Handbook, because we have to find a Chinese publisher, which we've done, which is really awesome. We're in the final stages chatting with a Chinese publisher, which is so exciting for me, because this version, the international version, is actually, you could call it self-published. I just put it on Amazon, which is what a lot of people do now. But in China, it kind of works differently. So you need to get an ISBN number, which this has as well, but it's a whole different process. So of course, we're not going to release this version in China. And I was hoping that we'll find a Chinese publisher, and we have, which is awesome. So we're working on putting together, it's going to be a bilingual version, obviously Chinese and English. And I think they call it 对照, like the languages are together. So it's kind of like a tool, because a lot of my followers in China actually follow my content because it's a topic they like, and because they want to follow a topic they like to learn English. So I think any success we have in China selling this book will be to people who are primarily using it to learn English. So that is super exciting. And what it means is, because when you sell a book like this on Amazon, you only have the set sizes. They have, you need to choose this, or this. But in China, because China obviously will publish the book, this is published on demand by Amazon. But in China, we'll publish it first off, whatever the print run is. So I can kind of do my dream book, which is really exciting. I want it to be much smaller than this, like a little handbook with maybe gold embroidery, embossing, or something like that. Like, I'm just super excited about that. So we're going to be working on that over the next few months, and they want to release it ASAP, which is awesome. Another thing, you mentioned, side gigs, but I think it's more or less my life. Like, I don't really stop thinking about stuff that I want to do for reports on China or other work like that. So actually, next month, I'm heading to Tibet for the first time ever. I chatted with you about that when you were in Shanghai.
Where are you
Tibet.
Going? Oh, Xizang?
Xizang. I should say Xizang. Oh, to Xizang.
That was just me being a little bit cheeky.
I was like, can you not hear me? Okay, I get you. And actually, we mentioned in the book why it's called Xizang as well. So should I read it out? Because this is really interesting, and I think a lot of people don't know this. It's a really brief note as to why we call it Xizang now. Okay, here we go. This handbook uses the correct term Xizang instead of Tibet for a number of reasons. First, Tibet is widely used in the West to refer not only to the Xizang Autonomous Region, but also Tibetan areas in Qinghai, Sichuan, Gansu, and Yunnan. So it refers to a larger area, which isn't accurate. Xizang accurately refers only to the Xizang Autonomous Region geographically. And secondly, and this is a big one that a lot of people don't know, in 1977, the UN adopted a resolution which requires the use of the Chinese phonetic alphabet, which is pinyin, as the standard spelling of Chinese place names in the Roman alphabet. So it's required basically legally. And thirdly, obviously the use of Xizang instead of Tibet removes that the political confines of the region as defined by Western institutions and separatist forces. So I think that's really interesting. Like, I always knew that it was about taking the power away from the Western narrative. Obviously, people say, you ask them, what's the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word Tibet? They'll reply, Free Tibet. So that name is just cloaked in Western garbage. So, but also to find out that there's UN resolutions and stuff relating to that and legality, it's really interesting. So it is Xizang. But in the book, every time I write Xizang, because people don't know what it is yet, I put in brackets with speech marks Tibet.
So you're heading
That's
there.
Why I said Tibet.
So you're heading there to do some reporting.
To do a film, actually. If you've read my book, it's basically going to be about the chapter in here on Tibet, which is called Free Tibet, which is basically talking about how hideous of a place that area was before 1959, before 1951, when it was liberated in 1951, but kind of Buddhist rule, which I think was devastating for the local people, ended when the Dalai Lama left in 1959. So I'm going there to basically do a short documentary on that chapter in this book. So it's going to be super interesting. We're going to, obviously, the capital, Lhasa, and then we're going to another place called, what's its name? Something like that. I forgot the name. But it's a place where Shanghai government has a lot of connections. So we're going to go and check out that place, which has one of the biggest remaining, what's it called? The places where the 5% privileged people lived and had slaves and things like that. So I'm going to go and check that out. It's a really hideous history. And I hope to show the world that soon with those videos. Apart from that, There might be more, but I can't think yet. But there will be more projects.
Well, I suspect that there's a lot of projects brewing away in that fertile mind of yours, as I kept saying. Look, we're running out of short of time. I guess I just wanted just to invite you to give us one final thought on the broad question of how information, I guess, about China um, affects the way that the world works and how it is that people can access better, more accurate, less distorted information about China, and I guess uh, become liberated themselves. I guess to be able to think openly about the possibilities of a foreign country. So, what are your thoughts on that? What is actually a massive topic?
It's a huge topic, but I think it's important to realize for people, especially in Western countries, that's the target. That's my target audience. They are highly propagandized when it comes to China. Um, Probably 99% of anything you read about China or watch on the news from Western media in any of those countries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, the UK, the US, is false and biased, and it's leading you to kind of view this country completely wrong. And I think a lot of that mainstream media power is being taken away at the moment from social media. TikTok obviously is more open than a lot of the other social media platforms. And then you have Red Note, where a lot of Americans, particularly, but also other Western citizens, were able to see and experience the real China and chat with real Chinese people. So I think the wind is being knocked out from beneath the wings of the biased Western media, which is pretty awesome. How can people get better information? You could follow reports on China on YouTube, but also one of the things I really recommend is to read the daily press briefings from the foreign affairs spokespeople in China. It's in English. The press briefings obviously are Mandarin Chinese, but they translate it into English really quickly, and it's posted on the same day. So basically, if you've seen the White House press briefings where the media asks questions about whatever topic, that's what happens every day in Beijing with the foreign affairs spokespeople, and they put all of the questions and all of the answers directly in English on their website every single day. So if you want to know China's thoughts on any of the hot topics, for example, if something happens in the world to do with China and you want to know the truth, go and check out what the foreign affairs spokespeople have to say, and you'll get it from the horse's mouth. I think that's probably one of the most valuable things people can do.
Well, we've reached the end of the show, Andy, and I'm really grateful that you've spared us 40 odd minutes to share with us your backstory and also give us some insights into what inspires you to do what you do. People can, of course, find Andy's book, The Woolmile Handbook, on Amazon, electronic versions and also paperbacks. And we look forward to version 2. We look forward to more videos and stories from your studio. And of course, we look forward to the regular episodes of Reports on China. So thanks again, Andy, for joining us.